Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. John White, the Chief Medical Officer at WebMD, and you're watching Coronavirus in Context. One of the things that we've seen throughout the pandemic is this rapidly emerging science. And the traditional model is, let's wait until things get published, and then we'll talk more broadly about it. But we don't have the time to do that during literally a pandemic that impacts the world. So what's the role of preprints? Joining me to help explain the pros and cons is my good friend, the editor-in-chief of Medscape, Dr. Eric Topol. Eric, it's great to see you as always.
Great to be with you, John.
You know, one of the things we've talked about is a success story of the COVID pandemic has been the speed of innovation. And part of innovation in terms of pharmaceuticals, in terms of diagnostic tests, is the ability to peer review, to have an outside group of experts look at it and assess it for its validity, for its objectivity. The pandemic, as I referenced in my remarks, hasn't allowed that. So we never really talked about preprints years ago. And now, if you remember early on in the pandemic, everyone was talking about it. So what's the role of preprint? And maybe we take a step back and help us define what do we mean by that?
Right. Well, this is really important stuff to get into, John, and I spend a fair amount of my day now, every day, looking at preprints. The real story here is that they've been going for about 10 years in one platform or another. The one that is mostly affecting us is bioarchives and medRxives, which is handled by Cold Spring Press, Cold Spring Harbor. And they are basically manuscripts that are put on that server after they've been screened. So they're not detailed peer review, but for example, they check or they have had IRB approval, and they basically fulfill good conduct of research, whether especially when it's clinical, but also lab-based research. And they have not yet gone out to peer review by journals, although right now many journals want people who are authors to put it on the preprint server first, because it's basically like peer review, because immediately after a good one's posted, Twitter is all over it, so in a way it's a whole different form of peer review. And it's really amazing. Like just yesterday, I have to say, I kind of was blown away. Here, Omicron, as you know, was just reported Thanksgiving, November, the end of November. And a paper from Israel was reported with follow-up through January 27th on a fourth dose on February 1st. Okay.
Yeah.
So on millions of people. All right. So we would never see that data normally if it only went through peer review. It could take months, or maybe.
But why don't we, the argument could be, Eric, why don't we speed up peer review? Why don't we make it quicker and easier instead of saying preprint? And I have to ask you, is preprint the right term? Because for those that aren't involved in research like you, preprint, I'm going to be honest, sounds to some people, it's going to be published, right? Yeah. And this is an early look. That's not the case.
Well, that's true. There are many preprints that never see the light of day. Quite a few are published. In fact, many in leading journals. It really is depending on who's writing the preprint. If it's coming from reputable people, they don't want to put something out there on the web. Yeah. I mean, their name is on the line, right? Mm-hmm. So if it's something that's flawed, it's going to get picked up by the masses. I mean, there's so many people that look at every preprint on these different servers. So, I think you have to be very careful about who are the authors, where is it coming from? But your point is essential, John, because what you said, well, what about just getting peer review faster? The problem is, when we do peer review, it's 2 or 3 people, right, who sometimes don't even really go through the paper carefully. And they take a long time. even with the pressure of the pandemic, trying to get it down to a week or two, by the time you get 3 reviewers in or 2 reviewers in, and they're late and they have to just keep, the editors have to keep pinging them, it's all done on a voluntary basis. So the real thing is peer review as we know it. Is that really the gold or platinum standard, especially since it takes quite a while? So what you're comparing with are 2 different ways to get, you can get a rapid mass review by experts and non-experts through a post on a preprint server.
It's like rapid and PCR in a way, antigen test versus PCR. But still, people could argue and say, change the peer review process, pay academicians or whoever to review it, hire more people. Like, this is serious, research that we really need to determine. But what about the fact where, there has been this attack on science throughout the pandemic? People don't like when recommendations change because the science is, our knowledge of the science is evolving. And I pointed out, you and I have talked throughout these 24 plus months, early on, there were a couple preprints that were wrong in terms of what they thought about treatment, what they thought about, infectiousness, et cetera. And people were starting to make decisions on that because the media doesn't really make that distinction, that it's a preprint.
You're spot on that.
How do we use preprints in the broader community? Because if it's not accurate, because it's still a little earlier on, that's a challenge, but we also don't want to miss opportunities in something that we need to address in terms of public health. How do we put it all together while recognizing sometimes it doesn't meet the rigor that we need?
Right. So, the treatment side of the pandemic has been one of the most important abuses and misguided aspects. So hydroxychloroquine was one of the early preprints from France that was completely off base, and it set off this hydroxychloroquine. There's been the same for convalescent plasma, which I reacted to when I attacked the FDA commissioner and the administration, September of 2020. Basically, the preprint is much more contamination than you'll see through high quality peer reviewed journals, right? And you have to ferret out what is either a likely suspect for contamination, wrong, versus the really high quality ones.
I mean, the body of literature is enormous. It keeps, doubling. It seems like every few months. How does someone keep up with it? Because we can say, all right, we have all these journals, and there's more and more journals evolving. We have, increased frequency. Now we have preprint to the degree that we never had before. How do you realistically keep up with it? I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. One could be reading preprints all day. How do you balance that? How do you utilize preprints?
Yeah, I mean, I basically try to stick with the top journals that I know well, and then I go through the 3 main preprint servers, at least for the pandemic, and I can pretty well look at 10 preprints, let's say, of their titles and authors, and know I'm only going to interest to zoom in on one because I know these people, or I know their work is impeccable. It's the real deal kind of thing. And I won't waste time looking at ones that I think I don't know the people, or the topic is not particularly germane or whatever. That's how I do it.
But most people don't have your expertise. So do we need to create some type of curation? Almost like an Dr. Eric Topol AI curator to put those things explicit.
I would love to see, your idea is very good, John. I would love to see a panel reviewer of each preprint as they come out, like Consumer Reports, and just give it, the yellow or the red circle stuff, but we don't have that. And, who are we going to get to do that? So you're right. It would help, because I think the average person who doesn't know the players, the institutions, the whole landscape, like yesterday, there was a really interesting preprint about 5 people from University of Maryland who died, and in their brain, in their cortex, they had the virus in the cells. And they also had an inflammation activation that looked like Alzheimer's. And I read this, and say, oh man, these are really good people. One of the leading coronavirus virologists was part of this to make this determination. As you know, it's been very controversial whether the virus gets into brain cells or if it just induces inflammation. So, I shared that because I know it was a good study, and it's, of course, a concern. And I shared that it's controversial. And if this is the real deal, we don't know how frequently it happens. And there were people that were upset. There were a few people that said, oh, we shouldn't have shared that. Well, it's actually important. What are we supposed to do? Suppress it? And it's a
But
preprint.
how should the media use it? Because often then those caveats that you described aren't mentioned.
Right,
And
right.
then people misinterpret the information. So we want to be egalitarian. We want to be transparent. In
Yeah.
some ways we want to have open access, right? But then how do we make sure that the caveats for preprint aren't misinterpreted?
Yeah, no, I think this is important. That is, you see now in the media, this has not been peer reviewed. Yesterday, there were 3 papers published in Nature, which I regard as one of the top 2 journals in the world in biomedicine. And they were 3 papers that characterize Omicron's properties. And obviously, this is all done in a matter of weeks. And these are, extraordinary studies, from Cambridge and Japan and whatnot, Hong Kong. Now, I read those preprints, and I don't see a word different in the preprints than in Nature. All right. So when I read a preprint of that quality, to me, it doesn't matter. And I wouldn't even, if I was a media, I wouldn't even make a distinction, because as far as I'm concerned, it's the real deal. Obviously, we still want peer review. We want it quick. We also want the journals themselves to get stuff out there. And now you see the journals have moved at velocity that I don't think any of them thought they were capable of.
That is true.
So it's good. And the problem is finding reviewers. The reviewers are getting burnt out. There's more publications, than ever before. So you also mentioned about all these other journals out there that are peer reviewed, that publish anything, predatory journals, right? That basically they just charge money, and then they're doing it for profit. So we have junk peer review too.
How do people distinguish it? We've talked about, curation, other type of technologies. Should the public not go to preprint servers?
Well, what I like about the preprint is you'll see anything that's important, it'll get thoroughly vetted.
It's like crowdsourcing. It's like crowdsourcing peer review in a way.
Yeah, basically Twitter is the disinfectant, the transparency, it's hitting the light of day. So you get the experts, you actually get more peer review by many more people. They tend to be savage, unfortunately. That's the one thing I'd say. But you know what? That's better than no peer review.
And there we see more of the data, correct? We're going to see more of the actual data as opposed to some journals where there's more tabulations and less of the actual primary data.
Yeah.
Not always, but sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that there are some people, leading people in academics, who actually think that Twitter experts who get on and put in their concerns or their positive feedback, that may be the best peer review system.
So what does the publication of research look like 2 years from now?
It's a really great question. I think what we have learned is we're intolerant of what used to be the time to get important things published. Journals have shown us that you don't have to do it. That takes months. It's been compressed, just like vaccines were compressed to be done in days, and sometimes even in hours. So, I think everything is changing now. We're moving to a more accelerated expectation. Now, how do we do that while preserving the highest quality with or without mass input? via Twitter or other social media. Maybe we need a different media that's not like Twitter, that's pure vetting preprints. And you can't be on it unless you get credentialed. And you basically, that might be the solution, because this whole somewhat
Should third
Byzantine.
parties score it in a way, almost?
Yeah, I mean, right now, Twitter obviously is public, and it's not really necessarily only for scientists. And yeah, anybody from the public can see what these people are saying. Some may understand it, some may not. But the problem is, and when you have papers on things like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, you'd like the public to see what the flaws are. But on the other hand, it isn't intent. Twitter was never intended for that. We don't really have the ideal platform for mass, quick vetting, and something to think about in the future. That would also be shareable to the public, but the public people who are not experts, who are not credentialed, wouldn't be doing the critiques necessarily.
Dr. Topol, I want to thank you again for sharing your insights, helping us dissect, exactly how do we use preprints and what's the future, because they are here to stay, and we're only going to see more use of this type of publishing. So thank you, Dr. Topol.
Oh, thank you, Dr. White. John, always a pleasure to be with you.